Yo, what's up everyone? My name is Yura and I am so happy to welcome you all to an introduction to my favorite historical Yu-Gi-Oh format of all time, Meadowlands Format. We'll be covering everything from top decks to weird rulings, so strap yourselves in for the long haul because it's time to take a trip back to 2013. So what is Meadowlands? Well, Meadowlands Format is a Yu-Gi-Oh format that was played at the YCS Meadowlands in the middle of May of 2013. This technically constitutes also like a month or so before that event occurred. It's the time period between the release of Hidden Arsenal 7 and the release of Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy, but the main event that occurred here was YCS Meadowlands itself. This format is played using the March 2013 ban list, which plants it squarely in the middle of the Zexal era. This means that Windup, who was the deck to beat for a good while, is now on life support, Solemn Warning is now at 1, thank God, and Sangan has finally eaten a ban. With only 4 days before Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy changes the game of Yu-Gi-Oh as we know it, the new cards from Hidden Arsenal 7 join the metagame, bringing with it the Constellars and the Evil Swarms, which are poised to do not much, honestly, at least historically. YCS Meadowlands is eventually won out by Atlantean Mermail with an extremely strong showing, with the only other deck contesting it within the top 4 being a single Fire Fist list. Now, you might be curious as to why I've chosen to focus so much of my attention and time into a format that is historically dominated by 1 or 2 decks. Well, my reasoning is twofold. First off, while Mermail is strong, it's by no means the format warping tier 0 super threat that it's sometimes believed to be. While historically the deck was quite dominant and it is still very strong, in the modern day there are decks like Fire Fist, Spellbook, Xyz Infernity, and Dark World that can all butt heads with it pretty consistently. Secondly, the format is just fun. Meadowlands has produced some of the most enjoyable games of Yu-Gi-Oh I've ever played. Most of the top decks in the format are interesting to play with and against, and the rogue decks in the format also have a lot going for them, with Lavalval Chain specifically enabling a whole slew of strategies. Hidden Arsenal 7 as the newest set brings a handful of really interesting things into the format in terms of both archetypal support and powerful generics. While I just mentioned Lavalval Chain, and I will continue to do so, there's plenty of other incredible additions to the format that make for some very enjoyable brews. The Constellars bring Pleiades and Tomali M7, both incredible extra deck pieces. Evil Swarm is introduced as an incredibly solid control strategy. Machina Gadgets get access to Tin Goldfish and Iron Call, and the Gem Knights, while not as strong as the Constellars and Evil Swarms, are still really fun to mess with. This is a format that can bounce between being incredibly fast or a slow burn control game, depending on the deck of choice and the matchup that you're into, and I adore how varied every game can feel. I think Hidden Arsenal 7, being the set that it is and the things that it brings with it, are genuinely the main reason to play this format over the pre-existing formats of this era. Things like Miami format, and I think there's like the tail end of like Windup format generally just doesn't have as many of the interesting tools that are present in a format like Meadowlands with the release of HA7. And that's actually one of the main reasons why I consider Meadowlands to be such an interesting little piece of Yu-Gi-Oh's history. It technically has another event take place within this time period between HA7 and Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy, but YCS Lil was like kind of weird. The event itself didn't even have HA7 for sale, and it was pretty much the exact same day that the product came out, so a lot of people didn't really have the cards in hand to really mess with things, which I feel like makes this format kind of a little under-tested. It's not quite the same as Edison, of course, because Edison only had like a weekend, but having like a couple of weeks with the new product and then a big event where people were kind of just defaulting on what was already good in Mermail and Fire Fist and a little bit of Spellbook and some other decks around, I think there is still a lot of testing to be done for a format like this. That said, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on a theoretical what if Meadowlands had more testing, and instead I want to talk about the staples and generics that actually make this format what it is. Okay, so right off the bat, I have to mention a Lavalval Chain again. It is a fantastic piece of the extra deck that not only enables meta strategies, but it's also one of the most fun cards to build jank around. It is an incredibly simple yet absurdly powerful effect, and it's one of the easiest cards in the extra deck to make, being a generic rank 4. It is a staple beloved by both Infernity and Heraldic Beast players alike. As for some of the other generic stars of the extra deck, we've got Diamond Direwolf and Black Ship of Corn for some generic removal, Maestroke and Zenmaines to stay alive, Gaga Cowboy to win trades and close out games, Levier to extend out the banishment, Dweller to hit the graveyard decks, and some really solid endboard pieces in Photon Strike Bouncer, Steel Swarm Roach, and Evil Swarm Nightmare, in addition to some powerful 3-mats like Shockmaster, which shockingly isn't an instant game ender, despite how evil this card is, and Vylon Die Sigma, which provides a very unique form of removal. However, historically, there were a lot of decks that simply didn't have the resources to make these extra deck staples consistently. You'll see this a lot in decks that are trying to play like Duality in Dragoonity at the time, to try and get the deck to be a little bit more consistent while they waited for their power plays, but we don't need to do that. We have a significantly more interesting solution to this, and that is where arguably the most important staple card in the entire format comes in: Instant Fusion. This card makes the extra deck so much more accessible to a wide variety of decks, and while we don't have everything I could want, looking at you, Mavalice, there are so many decks that benefit from the inclusion of a free body that lines up with their archetypal levels or types. Sometimes attributes as well, but we'll get to that shortly. Those are for evil things. In a similar but much less generic vein, Emergency Teleport is at 3 in this format. There's a good chunk of decks that really appreciate having access to another body for synchro plays or low-level Xyz, and when used in conjunction with Instant Fusion, it gives some lower powered decks ways to contest powerful boards without the use of their ever precious normal summon. And this is where the attribute thing tends to come up. Instant Fusion plus E-Tele is pretty much any Naturia synchro you could want. There are targets that fit the attribute requirements for 5s, 6s, and 7s. Do with that information what you will. Go nuts. Pilot X Saber to an event top. I believe in you. We actually have a really solid spread of hand traps as well. This is kind of before that era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where things start to turn into like my engine has a 1-card starter and then I'm going to supplement it with like 20 pieces of non-engine. We are way before that still. This is still 2013. That said, decks with smaller engine requirements can actually supplement their deck with a lot of these generic pieces to really help them feel more like a modern deck, despite the fact that their starters will a lot of the times just kind of lose to the normal summon getting removed. But it's 2013. The game does not end instantly most of the time, so it's fine. For instance, Max C, while a Plague and Master Duel, is actually more of a side deck piece here because some of the top decks just don't really care about it, namely like Fire Fist and Spellbook. Neither of them really give that much of a crap about the bug. And also you can use it for crimes in Earth decks, but don't let anyone know I told you that. Aside from the bug, we also have Effect Veiler and DD Crow, which are both phenomenal in their own right. They've been around in the format for a very long time, and they've kind of stood the test of time. We have some weaker ones too, like Skullmeister, and Droll is around, and is something that I am personally interested in testing more with because it, in theory, hits some of the top decks pretty nicely, but hasn't seen a whole lot of testing. But please feel free to do so. I highly encourage all experimentation with this format. As for spells, we've got MST at 3, Heavy Storm, Darkhole, Foolish, and Monster Reborn are all at 1, and all see consistent play. And it's also worth noting Dimensional Fissure, which I know it's kind of cringe, but like, it is good into the top decks, and while it's not necessarily a staple, if your deck can play it, and you don't really worry about the graveyard, it is a really solid sideboard piece. The trap lineup is no slouch either though, with Mirror Force, Torrential Tribute, Bottomless Trap Hole all at 2, Compulse at 3, both Solemns at 1. There are plenty of viable trap cards around in the format that really make back row feel meaningful. I've talked a little bit about the key cards of the format, kind of what makes the format Meadowlands, but there are some important things to know before I go introducing a bunch of decks to play. And that brings us cleanly into the rulings unique to Meadowlands and what makes the game fundamentally different than modern or previous formats. First things first, we are at a point in time where there is no ignition effect priority, but it is still in the era of first turn draws, making going first very appealing. However, because we're still in Master Rule 2, there is the caveat of only being able to have one field spell active at a time. As for the rulings unique to Meadowlands specifically, there are a few worth mentioning. And while this one is not necessarily Meadowlands related, it is one that is going to come up a lot, and it is different than how things currently work in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, so it is important to keep an eye on. That one being that Atlanteans and cards like them that are discarded to the graveyard for cost cannot be prevented from activating by moving them to a separate public information zone like the banishment. However, if they are moved to a private information zone like the deck or hand, they won't activate. To provide a more in-depth explanation of what I'm talking about here, say you have an Atlantean Dragoons in hand and a Mermail Abysteus. Mermail Abysteus will then attempt to activate its effect by pitching the Dragoons for cost and summon itself. Since the Dragoons has been sent to the graveyard, it can then activate its effect. However, if your opponent were to try and DD Crow your Atlantean Dragoons out of the graveyard because it is in the graveyard, but the chain is not finished resolving because the Abysteus still has to finish resolving, it being banished does not count it as having not been in the graveyard, and the Atlantean will then still be able to activate its effect. This is different how it is in Modern, because in Modern, if a monster is moved away from the spot that it needs to be in to activate its effect when it's pitched for cost and it is in the middle of a chain resolving, it won't work. That is not how it works in Meadowlands. It has to go to a private information zone to be stopped. So if you have something like Foolish Return, which is a card that I experimented with for a little bit, and I don't think it's worth it, but like that will work because the Atlantean will not be in a public information zone to resolve. That's like arguably the most complicated one, and it is an important one to know about because otherwise you will try to side in DD Crow into Mermail, which just doesn't work. The second big ruling that's different at exactly Meadowlands is that Evil Storm Castor and Constellar Pollux can have their extra normal summon condition negated by something like Effect Veiler. This is a weird one. It is very specifically for Pollux and Castor because their ability to give yourself an extra normal summon of their respective archetype is a condition and not an effect. For Meadowlands' sake, you might as well treat them as if they are effects because they can be negated by Effect Veiler. So just consider it like they work like everything else. You won't have to worry about it past that. Thirdly, this one's a little not as important, but it is a Meadowlands specific ruling, so I should bring it up. That Sis Hunter must stay on the field in order for it to activate its effects. And finally, Crimson Blader was ruled to be able to cause Mermail cards to miss timing if it ran over something like an Abyssland that tried to sum out something like an Abyss Pike or an Abyss Megalo that have the opportunity to miss timing. This is because the way that it is ruled is that Crimson Blader will be counted as Chain Link 1 and then Lind as Chain Link 2. So when Lind summons, the monster being summoned is not the last thing that happens in the chain, so it misses timing. If you don't know what missing timing is, functionally, if a card reads in its text, when something, you can something, that card can miss timing. If you want a more in-depth analysis of this, there are better videos for you than here. I am just a funny card game guy. I am not the expert here, I promise you. These are just some rulings to keep in mind. The rest of the game still functions as you would expect. The game is actually not too different than it is from Modern, apart from like it being like older than Modern stuff. So there's no like pendulums and links and stuff like that. And the board is still how it was in Master Rule 2. So don't worry too much about that stuff. With all the rulings and nonsense out of the way, let's finally get into the meat of things and talk about decks. So, what deck to play? This is the ever-present question that is always asked the second someone tries to latch onto a historic format, and I totally get it. The deck is how you represent yourself as you go and play in formats like these, and there is a lot of choice to be made. Things like Edison have so much variety, and Meadowlands is honestly not that bad for variety's sake either. So I've got a list of decks that I'm going to run through. We're going to start with the meta and then go down to the rogue and also just a little bit of jank because I like talking about jank. I love it so much. But if you don't find anything super interesting in here, that's totally fine. Not everything I've listed in here is going to be for everyone. And there are decks outside of the ones that I'm listing here that are around, but maybe not as consistent or have the same power ceiling. So if you want to explore all on your own, I totally encourage it. Absolutely do so. There is so much stuff that we haven't even had the chance to just look at yet, and I think there is absolutely a deck out there for you. But if you do want some guidance, I can definitely help to try to point you in the right direction. Looking to build a massive board full of negates and disruption? Try out Xyz Infernity. This combo deck, centered around Infernity Archfiend, focuses on emptying out your own hand and repeatedly special summoning Infernity cards through things like Infernity Necromancer and Infernity Launcher, while using powerful Xyz monsters like Lavalval Chain to put the Archfiend back in grave while netting even further advantage. Despite only playing 2 Infernity names in most lists, the deck has no shortage of starters, opting to use cards like Summoner Monk, Armageddon Knight, Dark Grepper, and Stygian Street Patrol to get Infernities into rotation from wherever. And because Infernity monsters don't have hard once returns on them, you can loop these cards multiple times in a turn to search out cards like Infernity Barrier, which is an Omnigate, and Infernity Break, a targeted pop. If you're interested in seeing what Infernity can do, check out this timestamp here. Interested in combo decks but don't think the build-a-board style is your thing? Maybe you prefer the ability to push through an established board and kill an opponent out of nowhere, while also having the capacity to set up a competent board going first. If versatility and aggression are more your style of combo, look no further than Atlantean Mermail. Mermail is the poster child of the format, and for good reason. Mermail utilizes 2 subsets of monsters, the Discarders, which net advantage on summon, Abyss Megalo to search Abyss spell traps, Abyss Teus to search a level 4 or lower Mermail, and Abyss Spike to search a level 3 water monster. And the discard fodder. The Atlantean monsters and Abyss Gun are used to both swarm the field and generate absurd amounts of advantage while also eating through your opponent's board. However, the final Mermail in the main deck is the piece that ties it all together. Mermail Abyssland is the main monster you'll summon off of Abyss Sphere, which is the card you will typically be searching off of Megalo, as it mostly guarantees you won't die the turn you summon it due to her ability to fetch either a big body or Abyss Spike, which can discard an Atlantean not named Dragoons for interruption. Additionally, since the main engine pieces of the deck don't really require the normal summon, you can opt to play cards like Deep Sea Diva for easy synchro access, or Genex Undyne to make finding your combo pieces even more consistent. While all of this main deck interruption and advantage is nice, Mermail's true power lies in the extra deck with Mermail Abyss Gyos. Gyos is one of the strongest single cards in the extra deck, with both its quick effect full field monster negate for anything with lower attack, and preventing higher level monsters from attacking. It can be an absolute nightmare to face down for many opponents. If you want to see the sheer power of Mermail at work, check out the timestamp here. If combo's not your style, try out Fire Fist. This mid-range strategy focuses on utilizing the incredibly powerful level 4 Fire Fist monsters like Bear, Gorilla, and Dragon to snowball advantage and keep board states in check. Bear and Gorilla specifically act as both removal and searchers for fire formation spells, while Dragon is the main way to access fire formation traps. The fire formations, though, are the real bread and butter of the deck, acting as searchers, extension, and ways to protect your own field. Historically, Fire Fist was played alongside Rescue Rabbit as a way to access the extra deck for power cards like Lagia, Dolka, or the Fire Fist Xyz monster, but something I find way more exciting is using Debris Dragon to target Fire Fist Raven in order to make a Black Rose Dragon that makes your opponent's effects miss timing due to Raven being able to activate as Chainlink 1, while Black Rose is Chainlink 2, leaving your opponent with nothing and you with a freshly set fire formation. On top of this, Fire Fist also has access to their own extra deck monster that is exceedingly powerful in Brotherhood of the Fire Fist, Tiger King. Much like Gyos, Tiger King is both a way to access fire formations, but is also a full field monster negate for anything that isn't a Beast Warrior, so basically the entire field. While it loses the quick effect that Gyos has, it replaces that with a floating effect that trade fire formations for any 2 level 4 or lower Beast Warriors with the same attack, allowing you to replace the Tiger King with any rank 4 of your choice for the cost of losing out on your formations. If you want to see Fire Fist in action, check out this timestamp here. Want to still play a little slower but have more control over what your opponent is doing? Spellbook will be right up your alley. Even without Judgment, Spellbook finds its place in the meta due to its incredibly versatile lineup of spells and easy access to some powerful extra deck monsters depending on your variant. With 3 different 1-card searchers being Blue Boy, Spellbook of Secrets, and Library of the Crescent, although that last one is significantly worse than the other 2. And for 2-card searchers being Summoner Monk, Justice of Prophecy, Temperance of Prophecy, and Spellbook of the Master, you'll almost never run out of ways to find engine pieces over the course of the game. And even if you do, that's where Grand Spellbook Tower comes in, acting as a sort of beta version of Runic Fountain to shuffle resources back into the deck while replacing them with a new card. All of these consistency tools help to facilitate your 2-star players, Spellbook of Fate, which is your main interaction in your opponent's turn, and High Priestess of Prophecy, which is your main way of pushing through board states and winning games. If you want to get into the control mindset of Spellbook, check out this timestamp here. Of course, the meta decks aren't the only thing to be playing. The rogue scene is full of incredibly fun brews and really sick decks. And I brought just a handful of them with me for your viewing pleasure. First up is a variant of one of the meta decks, being Synchro Infernity. This is a deck that has seen some amounts of success around this time period, although it's kind of been phased out in favor of the Xyz variant. Synchro Infernity gets to make use out of their kind of archetypal boss monsters, but like not really, because they're not in name, being Void Ogre Dragon and 100 Eyes Dragon. The latter being able to copy any dark monster's effect in graveyard and replace it with its own. This lets you do some really silly things like copying Infernity Mirage or Infernity Necromancer to get some absurd boards set up. And while it's not nearly as consistent as something like the Xyz version of the deck is, it is still an absolute blast to play. Next up, Chaos Dragons. This is an incredibly fun to pilot combo deck that is maybe the place to be for players who really want to show off their deck building and piloting skills. The general game plan is to fill your grave with lights and darks and make use of the chaos monsters like Light Pulsar Dragon and Dark Flare Dragon to slam a bunch of bodies onto the board, while also proccing the effect of Eclipse Wyvern to search out some incredibly powerful dragon bosses. This deck has so many weird texts and lines to find that every game feels like a new experience with it, and every time we go back to the lab with it, we find it some new card that feels like it pushes the deck even further. I would highly recommend anyone to give this deck a shot if you are interested in non-linear combo decks, because it is an absurdly fun deck to pilot, and I'm still convinced we've not figured out the best list yet. If you want something a little more familiar, Hero is present in Meadowlands with a few different ways to go about building it, many of which are knocking on the door to high rogue and maybe even meta. Bubble Beat is how the deck appears in Meadowlands historically, and it's still pretty solid here. It's a rank 4 focused build of Hero that aims to use Bubbleman's free summon from hand effect multiple times per turn by getting it from grave to hand using the warrior returning alive, and then finishing the game with a well-timed Miracle Fusion into absolute zero. This deck makes an incredible use out of things like Lavalval Chain and just the insane number of really solid warrior cards in the extra deck like Blade Armor Ninja and Heroic Champion Excalibur to make some really crazy pushes. It's also a deck that just spits out Shockmaster with absurd ease. It's really, really fun. Hero isn't just an Xyz spam deck here though. It can also do fairly well by spamming out fusions. A more pure build of Hero adds King of the Swamps, polymerizations, and a small Destiny Hero package to better spam out the good Omni Hero fusions like Absolute Zero or The Shining, while also having the capacity to lock your opponent down under a Destiny Hero Plasma. On top of this, you can also just do the rank 4 shenanigans because you're playing a lot of the same cards that the Bubble Beat version of the deck already is. However, Hero doesn't even stop at just Xyz and fusions though. Teledad makes an appearance here in the form of Telehero, which makes use of the Destiny Hero cards like Malicious, the generally solid Dark package, and Emergency Teleport being at 3 to spit out some very powerful synchro monsters like Void Ogre Dragon or Crimson Blader, in addition to the already present Xyz and fusion monsters. If you want to be the evil person at your group, I've got 2 decks for you that are, yeah, they're evil. First up being Dark World. This is a deck that is probably meta, but I don't believe in it, so I'm not counting it. Dark World is able to turbo through their hand with discard spells to generate massive amounts of advantage by ditching cards like Snow for a search or Brow for a draw on their way to the boss of the deck, Grapha, which can be used to activate incredibly powerful virus cards, which can be absolutely devastating in certain matchups. It's a really simple game plan, but can really ruin someone's day. A little less evil than that and a little less solitaire is Evil Swarm, one of the new players in the format, and it absolutely earns its spot. Evil Swarm Ophion is one of the strongest bosses in the format, up there alongside Abyss Gyos, due to its powerful floodgate effect and its ability to search out either interruption or protection for your board. Despite not having access to Kyrkion because it's not out yet, Evil Swarm can still get to Ophion fairly quickly through the use of either Rescue Rabbit for 2 heliotropes or an Evil Swarm caster using his extra normal summon for any other Evil Swarm monster in your hand. Additionally, since the deck doesn't care about the graveyard whatsoever, you can slot in evil cards like Macrocosmos and Dimensional Fissure. So have fun with that if you want. Not quite the level of Chaos Dragons, but another solid dragon deck nonetheless. We have Dragoonity, which is an incredible synchro combo deck that can eat through boards and mount huge amounts of pressure off of very little, due to just how powerful their archetypal field spell Dragon Ravine is. It's both graveyard setup and a searcher for a good chunk of the main deck, while also being incredibly accessible due to both it and terraforming being available at 3 copies each. The Dragoonity synchros like Vajrayana and Barca excel at enabling laddering by equipping Dragoonity Phalanx to them, which can then summon itself for more synchro plays. It's a deck that can search out hand traps in DD Crow, break through boards with Legatus and Aklos combo, and kill out of nowhere through the use of Trident Dragion. Just make sure to ask a friend to borrow theirs first. The Dragon decks just don't stop coming though, and next up we've got Hieratic. This is an awesome Xyz deck, and one that I've actually featured on the channel a couple of times already. Hieratic is a deck that focuses around making powerful rank 5s and 6s by tributing off hieratic monsters to summon out vanilla dragons. The pure build makes use of these vanilla dragons alongside some very funny instant fusion targets to make some extremely powerful removal tools in the form of Volcasaurus, Constellar Pleiades, and Tomley M7. Even past Interruption, the deck also makes fantastic use out of its archetypal rank 6 Hieratic Dragon King of a Tomb to access Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon for even further extension. Additionally, the deck can also be supplemented with something like Gen X Ally Birdman that can make Synchro 8s like Scrap Dragon and Void Ogre Dragon while resetting your Darkness Metal Dragon for next turn. However, it wouldn't feel right to bring up Hieratic without mentioning a variant of it that I have really fallen in love with, being Hieratic Gishki. Arguably the best and maybe one of the only ritual decks in the entire format, Hieratic Gishki makes use of the Hieratic's tendency to extend when tributed by any means. This includes being tributed for a ritual summon. The Hieratics also just happen to line up pretty perfectly with the levels needed for the best Gishki ritual monster, Eva Gishki Gust Kraken. Summoning Gust Kraken using any Hieratic monster will result in 2 level 6 bodies on board, and Gust Kraken shuffling back a card from your opponent's hand. Already powerful enough on its own, these 2 6s can then be overlaid into a Tomley M7, which can then return the Gust Kraken or a Hieratic from grave to hand to do the same thing again, or to make another powerful rank 6. Moving from the dragons to their cousin, the dinosaurs, we've got a couple of decks that do some different things. Jurak, and by extension Dino Rabbit, are the dino decks present in the format, and are able to make incredible use out of some of the most iconic boss monsters of the previous format, Evilzor Dolka and Evilzor Lagia. Dino Rabbit is the build of the deck that existed historically, and it's really not hard to see why. Much like Evilswarm, the deck has access to Di-Fi and Macro since it really doesn't care about its graveyard at all, and since the deck can use Rescue Rabbit to access its main engine with a very small amount of investment, it has room to fit in loads of non-engine to ensure its main line goes through. Jurak is the other end of the scale for Dino decks, and while it is definitely lower on the tier ranking than maybe everything else here, I do want to mention it because it gets to do one extremely funny thing. Jurak generally is a very combat-oriented strategy that relies on the Jurak names like Guaiba and Velo to extend out of the main deck, and makes great use of Rekindling to revive Jurak Aeolos, which is the other important card in the deck, being a level 1 tuner that allows the deck to extend into synchro plays. But where it gets really funny is when you get to make use out of the deck's unique instant fusion target in Practical, which is a level 5 dinosaur fusion monster, which enables us to make Jurak Meteor off of 1-for-1 plus instant fusion plus any Jurak name. So if you want to just drop a bomb on an opponent, despite the fact that it's really not that consistent, please do so. Moving from the reptiles to the age of machinery, that we've got one final deck for you, and that is a Machina Gadget. This is another deck that was apparent historically, and it is incredibly consistent. This deck can access pretty much any piece of the deck whenever it wants to by overlaying any 2 level 4 machines into Gear Gigant X. And despite the name being Machina Gadget, this deck can actually be built a handful of different ways. While the Machina monsters, especially Fortress, are still absolutely worth building around in this format, you can also totally dip into the Geargias and the Karakuris based off your preference if you wanted to try to do something more combo oriented, or, you know, play a little more control-y. Machines have a lot going for them in this format, and I would love to see more people try to experiment with it because I think the deck is really, really sick. If you want to see some of the Rogues Gallery in action, check out the timestamps here. All right, so what's a format showcase without showcasing the format properly? We've got 5 games lined up for you, 4 meta games, and 1 Rogue Showcase because I feel like it is important to showcase the decks just outside of the meta bubble. This is, of course, you might be realizing, one meta deck short. That's because I hate Dark World. I think it sucks. I'm not dealing with Dark World. We're not talking about it, all right? If you want to talk about Dark World, you can talk about Dark World. I'm not going to talk about Dark World until later in the month. So we're going to leave it alone, all right? All right. First up, we've got Mermail versus Infernity. This is a battle of the combo decks, and I could not be happier to be showcasing these games. I think this first game is a really sick showcase of the general pace of Meadowlands, even if we are playing into like some pretty heavy combo decks. That said, this format can be faster. I think the second game will showcase a faster version of the format, and then we'll get into some of the slower decks and see where they land. But starting with this game, this Mermail hand is not great. 3 Abyss Spike, 1 Deep Sea Diva, and 1 Dark Hole. Not ideal. This Deep Sea Diva, if you were playing the Gen X version, would actually be really solid because Undyne would pretty much completely unbrick us here. Unfortunately, we're not playing that version, so instead, we are just going to see where this goes. We're going to draw an Atlantean Marksman off the top and then go Deep Sea Diva. Diva's going to summon out another Marksman and make a Synchro 5 for Catastor and then passing on that. The Infernity player is going to draw an Allure of Darkness for a turn and then summon out the Summoner Monk, go Darkness, and then pitch this Dark Grepher in hand. Monk pitching Upstart Goblin here, summoning out a Dark Grepher. Grepher is going to pitch the Stygian Street Patrol that we drew for off the Allure of Darkness, and then sending an Infernity Archfiend to graveyard, and then of course setting the rest of the hand for the Infernity stuff. We also drew a barrier off of that, which is pretty solid. This chain is going to activate and stack to the top of our deck in Infernity Archfiend, which will be live next turn in the draw phase. And we're going to pass back to the Mermail player. Mermail player is going to go Abyss Pike, which is going to send this Marksman and then get Bottomless Trap Hold. This Marksman is going to pop this Rhoda so that we can actually, you know, get a little bit more advantage, even things out a little bit. We're going to go combat. Catastroph's going to clear this, and we're going to pass it back. The Archfiend is going to come down, searching out another Archfiend, which can then be summoned out by the Stygian Street Patrol, and then get another Archfiend effect. But this one is going to be mapped by the Veiler and then checked by the Barrier. So this is going to resolve. We're going to find a Launcher. Lavalval Chain is going to detach one of the Archfiends and sending Necromancer to the graveyard, and then go with Launcher. Launcher is going to be able to summon back the Necromancer and the Archfiend at the same time. This Archfiend is going to trigger, getting us a break, and then the Necromancer can summon out the other Archfiend in graveyard, letting this trigger and then getting us a barrier. So this Infernity player is pretty set up, but they do not have a clean way of outing this Catastor without getting rid of their Archfiends on board, which keeps their barrier live, which we then have to out with our own Dark Hole after normal summoning an Abyss Lind. Here's the barrier checking the Dark Hole, but now we can do pretty much whatever we want until this break is flipped, getting rid of our Catastor. We're going to go Lind into the Archfiend here, triggering the Lind off of Battle Destruction to get into a Megalo, which can then clear the Necromancer, which pretty much opens us up to try and survive the turn because our opponent no longer has their graveyard recursion. They're going to go the chain to get that back by stacking a Necromancer and then making a Utopia because the Archfiends no longer have to be on field because there are no barriers in the back row. So they're going to clear the board and then get in for 18 direct, passing it back, and we draw into a Megalo, finally turning on this hand. We're going to go Abyss Pike for Abyss Pike, searching out a Abyss Gund, which can then be pitched off of the Megalo double pitch, and that will trigger the Megalo and the Gund in the graveyard, Gund summoning back a second Megalo, and then Megalo searching out the Abyss Sphere before we make a Gaios, which can cleanly out this Utopia. This Abyss Pike kind of just sitting on board, not really doing anything. We're going to set this Abyss Sphere and then have it get MST'd before our opponent is going to draw into this Necromancer, which is then checked by the second Gaios material. But that is all of our interactions gone. Unfortunately, the Infernity player does miss going to combat and walking over the Abyss Pike, but I'm going to be perfectly frank with you, it is not going to matter in the long run. This Abyss Pike is not going to do anything relevant before it is eventually removed. We're going to draw for turn a Veiler, which does check any additional thing that they would find off the top here, being this Armageddon Knight is a pretty good choke point for that. Although the Knight doesn't really do that much, but, you know, it's just a guy. So they're going to walk over the chain, which they're going to walk over with the chain, which this should have happened last turn. We're going to draw into an heavy infantry, which doesn't really do much, and then walk over the Armageddon Knight with the Gaios, keeping them off of rank 4 material, which is good because they drew into an instant fusion, which now does nothing. We're going to go with Deep Sea Diva off the top into a heavy infantry, making an Armory Arm. Armory Arm is going to attach to the Gaios. Gaios is going to walk over this Lavalval chain, burning for 1800 because of the Armory Arm's effect, and we're going to pass it back. They're going to draw into a break off the top, set both, and they are just waiting for any kind of 4, but we find Teus. Teus is going to get us access to a Mermail name, being Lind in this case, which pretty much helps us deal with anything that would you know, pop our field like a Mirror Force, which, you know, might come up a little bit later. We'll see. They're going to use this break to get rid of our Gaios, though, preventing them from dying. And they are going to draw into a Mirror Force. We're going to set down this Abyss Sphere. This Mirror Force is going to trigger. And we're going to get into lethal with this Abyss Turge, summoned off of the Lind Destruction effect. All right, we're looking at things from Infernity's perspective this time. Pretty decent hand, I will say. This Grepher being able to pitch this Necromancer and an Allure of Darkness in hand again. Just 2 games in a row finding the Allure. It's just, we're just that good, I guess. Mermail player is post board. This is a part of a match, though we aren't going to show a game 3 if it were to exist, because I want to try to keep this a little bit tighter. So they do have a Mexi in hand post board, which in theory is pretty good here, but not for this particular hand, and you'll see why. We're going to draw a Barrier off the top, go Allure of Darkness. We're going to draw 2, and the 2 drawn off of that Allure are Archfiend and Launcher. Just the greatest Infernity player of all time. We're going to pitch this Necromancer for the Allure of Darkness effect, and then normal summon out this copy of Dark Grepher. Grepher is going to be able to send this Archfiend to graveyard, which is going to be met by a Veiler. We're going to launch her. We can launch her for 1 here after setting the field. They're going to max C, which is going to get them a single draw, because we don't really want to get this Archfiend off of field, and then grab a Barrier and set the Barrier. This field into 5 cards that don't really have a lot of board breaking potential is Barrier, Barrier, Warning, Break, all of which are live. That is an insane amount of interruption for turn 2. So let's see what the Mermail player can do, if anything. They're going to lead with this Megalo, pitching both of these Linds, because they're not really doing much in hand, which is going to be met by a Barrier. Here comes the Pot of Avarice, trying to get some resources back in hand, which is going to be met by the second Barrier. And then down comes the Monster Reborn, trying to reborn the Megalo, which is going to be met by the Warning. Good lord. And we still have a break online. Draw for turn. Here's a Heavy Storm. We're going to get this Archfiend off of field because you don't really need it anymore. We're going to stack to the top of the deck an Archfiend for later turns. Sink at 1,800 points of damage. Technically we missed out on 17 by not just swinging in direct with the Grepher and the Archfiend first, but it's fine. We're going to pass things back. Our opponent's going to find a Judgment, which is going to be met by this break that we're just going to flip immediately before it's live. And then we're going to draw into Archfiend off the top that we stacked. Go Archfiend, grab a Necromancer. Necromancer, we can normal summon. Necromancer effect is going to be able to get us an Archfiend out of the graveyard. Archfiend is going to be able to get Archfiend. And then we can go Lavalval Chain, send this Grepher to the graveyard, and send a Stygian Street Patrol. Street Patrol to summon out the Archfiend. Archfiend, grab Break. And it's like nothing ever happened, but it's not going to matter because we can just walk in for lethal. All right, the second set of decks we're showcasing are the more lower to the ground decks, both the controlling Spellbook and the mid-ranging Fire Fist. I think these decks are both extremely cool. I love them both very, very dearly, although I'm not very good at Fire Fist, unfortunately, but I'll get there one day. This Spellbook hand has, you know, much like the Mermail hand, has seen better days. Double Veiler, no starter is a pretty unfortunate place to be, and the Fire Fist player has opened pretty decently, I'd say. So let's start this off. We're going to find a Justice of Prophecy off the top, which is technically a starter, although albeit a very slow one. This is going to get us Secrets and High Priestess for next turn. The Fire Fist player is then going to draw into a Duality and find a Tanky off of it. We're going to go Tanky. Tanky is going to grab a Dragon. Dragon is going to summon. And then we're going to go Tensu. Tensu to activate the Dragon, trying to get some traps online. But that is going to be met by the Veiler. And then we're going to summon the Bear, which is going to be met by a second Veiler. We're going to get it for 3,800 points of damage, which is not insignificant, and then set both the Tencent and the Bottomless Trap Hole. We draw into a High Priestess of Prophecy for turn, which is pretty nice. We're going to summon out the first one, which is going to be met by the Bottomless Trap Hole, and then go for the second one, which our opponent has no answer to. Then we're going to follow up with the Secrets. Secrets get the Tower. Go Master, targeting the Secrets to get a Blue Boy, which is going to put another stack onto the Spellbook Star Hall. We're going to do a couple of chaining things here. We're going to go High Priestess of Prophecy targeting down their Dragon. They're going to go Tencent targeting their Bear to make it really big, to hopefully try to prevent us from walking over it. Unfortunately, we do have a Power in hand. We're going to go Blue Boy to get Fate, and then go this Grand Spellbook Tower, and then go Power to make this High Priestess extremely large. Get it for 1,100 points of damage, and search out a Wisdom, and then sinking in 900 direct with the Blue Boy. We're going to set 2, and then pass back to our opponent, who draws a Tanky off the top. They're going to go into Dragon. Tensu is going to summon out the Dragon, which is then going to be met by a Fate, changing it to face down with the defense position. They're going to set the Raven, and then we're going to draw into Fate. We're going to use Grand Spellbook Tower to draw into another card, find a Summon Monk that we don't really care about, and then walk over their board before the Raven sets them another Tanky. Here's another copy of Raven they draw into. They're going to go tanky into Bear. Bear's normal summon. And then she's going to pop down our High Priestess before walking over the Magician of Prophecy with the Bear, setting the Raven and getting another Tensu online. We're going to find Eternity, which is one of the best draws in the deck right now. So we can get Secrets. Secrets is going to activate, getting us a Blue Boy. We're going to go Blue Boy. Blue Boy is actually going to get us another Power. Power is going to boost us up to 2,300, just enough to walk over this Bear. And then we're going to go Power into Spellbook of Life. Life is going to trigger banishing out this Blue Boy and summoning out a level 3 Veiler before flipping out the Summoner Monk and making an Arcanite Magician, which can use the counters on Spellbook Starhall to eat all of our opponent's unknowns because this card is not once per turn. We're going to set the Fate, and then they're going to find Heavy Storm. We're going to go Spellbook of Fate, bouncing this Wisdom to hand, just so we have another Spellbook online for the inevitable sequence that we do here where we summon out Temperance and grab a Blue Boy off of the Starhall. We're going to draw into Secrets for turn, which is, you know, just crazy. We're going to go Blue Boy. Blue Boy is going to get us another Starhall. And then we're going to go Temperance because we activated a Spellbook into High Priestess. We're going to go Master, targeting the Secrets, and then getting a Tower. Much like nothing ever changed, we're back to where we started, and we're going to walk in for Lethal. This is very much a matchup of who gets their engine online most and the longest. And sometimes it's the Spellbook player, sometimes it's the Fire Fist player. I think this time you will get to see, even though our Spellbook opponent has opened pretty nicely, just how good a Fire Fist player that has been able to just stick a guy for a turn and had its effect resolve can run away with a game. So, Fire Fist player is going to draw into Horn of the Phantom Beast. That card will be important later, and summon out a Bear and set the rest of the field. Spellbook player is going to go for a Spellbook Magician of Prophecy, finding Secrets. Secrets is going to grab a Tower. They're going to go Master. Master targeting Secrets. Secrets is going to add the Spellbook Starhall. They're going to go High Priestess of Prophecy, which is going to walk into a bottomless trap hole. We're going to go Spellbook Starhall and then Tower to get another counter on it. Then go Power to be able to walk over this Bear because we're at 17 with these Spellbook Starhall counters. But this is going to walk directly into a Horn of the Phantom Beast. Horn of the Phantom Beast is going to equip onto Bear, boosting our attack by 800, killing the Magician of Prophecy in battle, which is going to trigger two things. Both the Bear to get us a Tensu and the Horn of the Phantom Beast to get us an additional draw. In this case, it being tanky. We're going to draw an MST for a turn and pop this Unknown. We're going to go Tanky to get another Fire Fist name, then go Tensu. Tensu is going to summon out the Gorilla, which we can then use to pop the Dimensional Prison, summon out a Dragon, and swing in for a bunch of damage. This Fire Fist Bear is going to set a Tanky, and then we're going to swing in for the rest of them to get even more damage in. This game is pretty much solidified, considering that our opponent just drew into a Dark Hole, and we have a Judgment online. But they are going to shuffle back with the Tower and then find a High Priestess of Prophecy, which is currently dead. They're going to activate the Dark Hole. We're going to meet it with the Solemn Judgment. And then just from there, it is a very simple jump to Lethal by walking in with our board. For our Rogue Showcase, we've selected the Machina Gadget list that I have very much come to adore, and an old favorite of mine in Hero. These two decks, I think, both have the potential to, like, not necessarily become meta, but at the very least, try to keep up with them to an extent. And I think at the very least, Machina Gadget has shown that it has the potential to do that, but Hero is lacking behind a little bit. I'm not sure if it's the build. It probably is, because this is still a deck that can do so much, and we're still trying to figure out the best variant to play of it. But this is one of my favorite variants, which is the more fusion-heavy version. So we're going to start things off with the Machina Gadget player drawing for a turn. They're going to find a Fortress, then go Red Gadget for their normal summon, finding a Yellow Gadget. They're going to pitch the extra Red Gadget and the Fortress to summon the Fortress out of the graveyard before passing it over to our Hero player. Hero player is going to go into Stratos, which is going to grab a Bubble Man to hand, and then go Monster Reborn, targeting this Red Gadget in the graveyard to get a level 4 body on board. This is all in service of making a Lavalval Chain, which can then detach the Stratos and get a Malicious into the graveyard. Deploying this Malicious may be a little too early, but it's fine for chump blocking purposes before walking over to this Red Gadget and passing it back. Gadget player finds Iron Call off the top, which is phenomenal. They're going to go Yellow Gadget to get Green Gadget, and then Iron Call for the Red Gadget in the graveyard to make a Gear Gigant X, which is just a phenomenal card. They're going to find Gear Frame and then summon out the second Fortress before walking over the board and sinking in 25 direct. Hero player's turn to do something crazy. They're going to find Photon Thrasher off the top and then normal summon Prisma. Prisma is going to reveal Destiny and Dragoon, sending Plasma to the graveyard, which is now, it is Plasma. Don't worry, that's not going to matter. We're going to set the hand and summon out the Bubble Man before the Machina Gadget player snipes out one of our back row with the MST that they set. Unfortunately, it is a copy of Warrior Returning Alive, but fortunately for the hero player, there are 2 copies of it set, so it's not too much of a difference. They're going to flip over the second one, getting this Plasma to hand, and then tributing all those monsters for the Plasma and sucking up a Machina Fortress, and then activating a Miracle Fusion for Absolute Zero, which is going to walk directly into a Mirror Force. The Ab Zero is going to clear the board, but the Machina Gadget player does still have a Gear Frame in hand, and this top deck monster Reborn is more likely than not going to seal the game. They're going to go Reborn for the red gadget get yellow gadget, and then use that material to summon a fortress to the field before walking in for lethal. I'm going to thank you all so much for sticking around at the end of the video. This is my first attempt at doing anything scripted content-wise, and I had a lot of fun doing it. I want to give a huge shout out to my friends who I have been on and off testing Meadowlands with for the past handful of months. Taking a bit of a break recently, but I have really had the fire lit under me again, which is why I'm doing the month of Meadowlands in the first place. And I would not really be where I am with this format, and these decks would not be where they are without them. So I really want to give a huge shout out to them. If you have an interest in Meadowlands format outside of just watching my stuff, Caleb.exe has some phenomenal deck profiles over on their channel. A lot of them I will actually be covering variants of those decks on my channel, but not the exact lists. For instance, if you want to see Gen X Mermail or Fire Fist, the Fire Fist list that was used in this video, go over there. There are some phenomenal deck profiles. The Fire Fist one is genuinely one of the best deck profiles on the format on YouTube at this point in time. It is really, really well done. Shout out to Ren for both that list and commentating that deck profile. And Caleb's Gen X Mermail deck is phenomenal. I think it is arguably the way to play the deck. That said, I really do want to thank each and every one of you for sticking around. I know this video was a lot. I don't know if it is really going to land because I've never done scripted content before, but like I said, I had a lot of fun making it, and I had a lot of fun just filming all the stuff for it. It was a lot of big learning experiences, and I have some ideas for things that I might want to do in the future that are more scripted rather than just kind of like going free flow. By the way, this right now is free flow. This is not scripted. I probably should have scripted it, but here we are. I'm Yura. I'm doing the Yura thing. I'm just yapping. But I hope you all stick around for the rest of the month of Meadowlands. I have a lot of really awesome videos planned, a lot of scrapyards, a lot of deck profiles, a very special video going up relatively soon with my soon-to-be wife, and a really special surprise at the end of the month that I hope you all stick around for. So with all that out of the way, thank you all so much again for sticking around and enjoying the content, even if you are mostly just here for rush dueling stuff. More of that to come still, I promise you, but I do want to take a moment and just really sit and, you know, focus on Meadowlands for a short time because I love this format so dearly. That's enough yapping for me, though. I hope to see you all for the rest of the month of Meadowlands, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye!